Hi Sec 2, so for today's lesson, we will be focusing on the checkpoint quiz, the corrections and the review for the quiz that you have done over the March holidays. So after today's lesson, at the end, please ensure that you have written down the corrections for all the answers. And as I'm going through the corrections, please look at what you have done well for each question, but also look at what are some of the errors that you have made that we have identified and indicated, okay, and also how you can improve on them. Keep up the good habits while also getting rid of the bad ones. Alright, so make sure that you learn what you have done well, but also what you have to improve on. Okay, so let's start. We will be looking at the questions and the sources simultaneously. So firstly, at the start of your source base, there is always this part, okay, that has the question. Okay, and for this, it is the main inquiry question, the one that I have already put in brackets in red. Okay, so that is the main question that we're going to look at, that all the sources will be linked to. What was life like during the Japanese occupation in Singapore? Sounds very familiar, right? It's actually very similar to your HI question. Alright, so the topic is on the life in the Japanese occupation. Okay, and then if you look after the question, there's this thing called the background information. Why am I highlighting to you this? Is because some of you have indicated this, okay, for the first question as your evidence for source A. However, if you look very clearly there in bold, it says background information. So what is the purpose of this background information? Okay, it's supposed to tell you more information about the Japanese occupation and to so-called guide you before you look at all the sources. So to help you recap the knowledge of this chapter in case some of you have forgotten, but also to give you some context and make sure you're on the right track. Okay, so for example, this part, okay, the Japanese occupation of Singapore took place from 1942 to 1945, right? Following the fall of the British colony on 15 February 1942, the Japanese occupation marked the beginning of a dark chapter in Singapore's history. The locals experienced hardship, okay, and faced shortages of many items. They lived in constant fear of the Japanese, who ensured that the locals did not rebel against their rule through various measures. So what was life like during the Japanese occupation in Singapore? Okay, so there were some things that I highlighted, and basically is to recap what exactly happened during the Japanese occupation. And if you can tell from this background information, they're really focusing on the effects and the negative impacts faced by the locals. Okay, so the background information, just to recap, okay, at the final time that we will be telling you is that it is not part of the source. It is to help you to recap and to link the knowledge from the question, the main question, to the sources as well. Okay? Okay, so let's look at source A. Alright, I'm not going to give you the answer straight. We're going to break down the source. I'm going to tell you how we marked it, because the the level and marks, okay, which is also called LOMs, that are used will be the same throughout all the different questions that you are doing. So for example, all the inference questions, right, they will have the same level and the marks. The purpose of questions will have the same level and marks, okay, and so forth. Alright, so let's look at the inference one first, which is the easiest skill, right? It's the first skill that you have ever learned in Sec 1. Okay, so let's look at the source. Let's highlight the keywords of the provenance. Okay, because some of you did not pay attention to that. Number one, who is the author? Okay, this guy, right? Local cartoonist. If it's a local cartoonist, means he or she was a fellow person living in Singapore during the time, or maybe even after the time of World War II, but he's a fellow Singaporean, okay, and his views on World War II. If the artist or the cartoonist is local, Singaporean. Where do you think it is published, this cartoon? Most likely Singapore, right? Okay, so you can write here first, this person is the author of the source. Okay, and published in SG, Singapore. Okay, so make sure you write this down. Okay, so that you know that the author is thinking in whichever person's perspective. Alright, so let's look at the source first, okay? It is a cartoon, it is a picture source. Okay, and the question also asks you to identify certain things or to infer certain things. Okay, so let's look at it and highlight the keywords. Study source A. What can you infer from the source about the Japanese occupation? Okay, it's very clear. They give you something to focus on, right? So you can also write down here that this is the focus. Sorry, it's a bit. Okay, focus of the question. Okay, so if the question is asking you about the Japanese occupation, let's look back at the source. What does the source tell you about the Japanese occupation? Okay, I'm just going to circle certain things that are very key and good things to note as evidence to support your answer. Okay, many of you talk about this, right? Keep Shonan Clean campaign. Is it literally keeping Shonan, which is Singapore during the Japanese occupation, clean? You think about it. How do they want the Japanese, how do they want to keep Shonan clean? Who do they want to get rid of? Right? And these skulls here, okay, who do they represent? If it's Suk Ching, who or which group of people does the Japanese refer to? The Chinese, right? Okay, so you already know that Suk Ching has got to do with the Chinese. Keep Shonan clean. How? This guy is the Japanese, right? I just write here in short form, okay? Jap. Okay, and what is he holding? The broom. Correct? So he is cleaning away the skulls. Figuratively, he is getting rid of the Chinese. He's not literally keeping the road clean, right? He is just getting rid of them by killing them and therefore making the country clean. Okay, so please take note, because some of you, when you explain your evidence, you say that, oh, the Japanese wants to keep or wants to make Singapore clean. You think about it. Is that their focus during the war? To keep the environment clean? Okay, so the cartoon is being very figurative, not very literal, in saying how they want to keep Shonan clean. Alright, okay, some of you also talked about this evidence. Head or head or tails, you win, you lose. Okay, you can also talk about that. Okay, so let's look at the level marks or description. Why I want you to pay attention to this now is because I'm going to ask you later on. I'm going to show you some samples and you are going to tell me what level would you award that particular sample. Okay, so level 1, 1 mark. You're either not answering the question or you're just totally quoting or describing the source. Okay, you're not inferring at all, so that is a 1 mark. L1, 2 marks. Your inference is invalid, totally invalid. Okay, like you tried and you talked about the Japanese occupation, but it is not an inference. Okay, number 3, level 2, 3, sorry. Okay, it is valid inference, but you have weak supporting evidence. That means your evidence is not described properly, which many of you are there. Okay, on L3, 4, valid inference, supporting evidence and explanation. Okay, so if this total marks over here you see is 4 marks for an inference question, how many inference paragraphs do you need to give? Okay, you think about it, you only need to have one good inference. Okay, but if you give 2 inferences, it's fine. But to attain the 4 marks, you actually only need one valid and good inference with supporting evidence. Okay, so let's look at the samples now, and you're going to tell me what levels do you think you will give them. Okay, so let's look at sample answer number 1, or part A. I can infer that the Chinese were killed. The evidence shows skulls which spelled Suk Ching on the floor, which was the event that killed many Chinese. This means that many Chinese were killed. What level would you give? Okay, I'll give you about 10 seconds to think. Okay, so if you look at it, right? Is it answering the question? You need to ask yourself that. Is it talking about the Japanese occupation? It is only talking that or saying that the Chinese were killed, right? This part. Okay. Here. Is it anything about the JO? No. So it is not answering the question. Even if the evidence and the explanation is solid and good, I cannot award you the higher level. Remember, the higher the level, the better the answer is. So at the start already, the inference is weak. This is immediately a L1. 1 mark. Okay, so check your work. That is how we mark. The one in the circle is the marks. Okay, the L is the level. I think you know this already. Okay, so the Chinese were killed. It is not linked to JO, therefore not ATQ. If Miss Elsa or me, Miss Vanessa, has written that, now you should understand what it means. Okay? Now, the next one, part B. I can infer that the Japanese were harsh towards the Chinese during the Japanese occupation. The evidence shows a sign called Keep Shonan Clean campaign and many Japanese flags around. This means that the Japanese wanted to keep Shonan-to clean. Okay, you go step by step. Is the inference valid first? Is it answering the question? I can infer that the Japanese were harsh towards the Chinese during the JO. Were they harsh? Yes. Okay, so this part is correct. Okay, my inference is that. So immediately, I can actually get an L2. I'm going to write there L2. The evidence shows a sign called Keep Shonan Clean campaign and many Japanese flags around. This means that the Japanese wanted to keep Shonan clean. Okay, it was what I said just now, right? It's not literal cleaning. Right? So this evidence, does it link to the inference or not? 5 seconds to think, okay? Does it show that the Japanese treated the Chinese harshly? No, right? Because you're just talking about cleaning. Evidence is totally off. Okay, so what is the highest level that I can get? Over here is L2. How many marks? 3 marks. Alright? So inference very good. Okay, because your inference is valid, the Japanese were harsh towards the Chinese during the JO. Answering the question. But the error now is the evidence and explanation. Okay, so this part wrong. The second part. Okay, the last one, part C. I can infer that the Japanese was brutal to the Chinese during the Japanese occupation. The evidence shows a Japanese soldier sweeping the many skulls, which symbolize the Chinese who had been killed during Operation Suk Ching. The broom that he is using has a bayonet, which is like a sword, at the end of it, symbolizing how the Chinese were killed. This means that the Japanese used harsh measures during their rule to get rid of the Chinese. Okay, let's go step by step. Now, number 1. I can infer that the Japanese was brutal to the Chinese during the JO. Is this as an inference answering the question? Definitely yes. Okay, because they're also saying about the Japanese and during the Japanese occupation, right? So this is an L2. Okay, let me just write there. Now the next one, evidence. The evidence shows a Japanese soldier sweeping the many skulls which symbolize the Chinese who had been killed. Broom has a bayonet and symbolizing how the Chinese were killed. Is that good evidence or not? Very clear, right? And very detailed. What the skulls represent? What does the soldier represent also? What does the action represent? Okay, so he has broken down the evidence. He has explained it in his own words, in his own ways, while describing the picture. And the last explanation, this means that the Japanese used harsh measures during their rule to get rid of the Chinese. Okay, of course the explanation is good already, but can be better as well. But because the inference and supporting evidence is matching and links, I will give this an L3, 4. Okay, I hope you can see my writing. Okay, and you also look at your work. Okay, which level do you get? Check with the level and marks on the top there. Okay, on the top of the video, and see why did you get that certain mark. Okay, if you are just describing, or if I write there rephrase, you are just rephrasing what the source shows in your words. Okay, if it is lifted, means you just copy and paste whatever the source is saying and you just described it. L1. If you do not focus on the Japanese occupation and you just talk about the Chinese being killed, like the first one, part A, you're immediately going to an L1 as well. Okay, so many of you made the careless mistake where you totally went out of focus and did not talk about the Japanese occupation. Unfortunately, we cannot award you the marks because you are not answering the question. Okay, so if you wish to copy the corrections later on, please take note that alphabet C is the answer. Okay, the best possible answer. And because you only need one inference, that is the only inference paragraph that you need to write. Okay? You may pause this video as well if you don't want to look at the Google Drive later on. Pause it. You can just start writing your corrections now. Okay? I'm going to go on to the next question, which is the purpose question. Okay? I know that this is the first time that we are quizzing you on the purpose question or the Aweko question, but it was a pretty good job done by the whole cohort, okay, in trying and getting the message as well. Okay, so right now, let's look at the top again. Provenance. Okay, this is a poster produced by the Japanese administration during the Japanese occupation of Singapore, right? So besides knowing who is the author, they also told you when it was produced, something new. Okay, so let me use, okay, the color changed, but never mind. Okay, let's look at the different categories that you need to identify when you're doing a purpose question. Okay, and also one more thing that we need to highlight is the question itself. Study source B. Why was this source published? Is this an inference question? No, right? The moment they ask you why, you know that this would be the purpose question. Okay, the new question type that we have taught you this year. Explain your answer. This is 5 marks. Okay, so as I'm doing the author, word, audience, context, and outcome, we are going to break down this picture as well. Okay, it is the second pictorial source. Let's also look at it first. Okay, there is the Japanese flag and the British flag. Shop selling British products, shop selling Japanese products. Many of you have identified correctly that the queue at the Japanese products shop is much longer. People are trying to buy something. compared to the British products. And you think about it, if it's produced by the Japanese, right, administration, what kind of poster is this? The Japanese occupation always has this kind of posters. Starts with P and it is called propaganda, right? Okay, so the Japanese has an intention in producing this poster, right? And showing why the Japanese, everyone's going to the Japanese shop compared to the British shop. And if you look at the Chinese words on the top there, rely on Britain and you will lose all your money. Okay, so why do you think they have chosen to write that? If you rely, let's say they're telling the audience, if you rely on Britain, you're going to become bankrupt. You're going to lose everything. So would you want to do that? Okay, they're asking them to question themselves, right? Okay, so let's look at the AWECO first, the AWECO framework. Don't worry so much about the main message. Okay, we'll go to that later, but let's break it down slowly. Those of you who didn't get the format or still don't understand this, at the side, when you're breaking down these type of questions, write down the different categories, AWECO, and who, what, where they are. Okay, so number one, who is the author? I think this one we know already. Okay, you can write down at the side of your cartoon over there, Japanese administration. Okay, look at your question paper, write it next to the source. Draw a table and write it down, alright? Okay, so word. Maybe you hold on to that first. Who do you think the audience would be? If it is produced during the occupation of Singapore and is by the Japanese, who is the targeted audience? Definitely going to be the locals, right, of Singapore. Okay, I'm going to use short form. Okay, and what do you think the Japanese administration, as a propaganda poster, right? You already can tell this is a propaganda poster. What do you think they are wanting to do for the word? Okay, the most common word that can be used for a propaganda poster, convince or persuade. Okay, I hope that you can read my writing. Okay, but not to worry, later on I will type it out as the corrections and post it up. Okay, now, next one, context. What does the Japanese administration want to convince the locals about the Japanese? Is it just very narrow and just saying that, oh, they want to convince the locals that Japanese products are better than British products? What is the overarching main message? What is the main idea that they're trying to bring across? The main idea in saying that Japanese products are better than British products is just saying very simply that the Japanese is better than the British. Agree? Okay, so they wanted to convince the locals of Singapore that the Japanese is better than the British. Okay, right now I'm only just going to write the message. Later on, we will show you the evidence and the explanation for this. Okay? Now, lastly, the outcome, right? The outcome also means the action. What does the Japanese want the locals of Singapore to do as an action? Okay, think about it. A propaganda poster, what is the most common action that they want the locals to do? Support. Okay, support the Japanese, right? Support is an action. Okay, so if it's a propaganda poster, this is the most common answer that they want the locals to do. Support the Japanese, definitely, right? And not support the British. Okay? Okay, so let's go to the answers. You can pause this page and write down the notes at the side. Okay, I hope you're following well. Now, let's go to the the level marks and the answer. Okay, the sample answer. Now, marks, how are we allocating you the marks? Number one, L1, totally not answering the question. You give me an inference answer, I will give you an L1 because you are not explaining why. You are just saying I can infer blah blah blah. Okay? Now, level 2 is if that it gives you an invalid message. How does it look like? I will show you later on. Level 2, 3 marks is if you have a good message but weak evidence, or a valid outcome but wrong message, you get 3 marks. Okay, at least you pass the question. And level 3, 4 marks, valid message, supporting evidence. 5 marks is everything, valid message, supporting evidence, and finally outcome. Okay? Most of you will be getting 3 or 4 marks. Okay? Some even can get the 5 marks. And if you can achieve that, I would say that is a job well done on you. Okay? Now, study source B, why was this source published? Okay, I'm not going to highlight the words already because that's what we did. Now, the sample answer looks a bit different. Okay? So the source was published. Once you know the structure and the format, is very easy. You just slot in all the Aweko framework, right? The source was published by the Japanese administration, right? Highlight that. Okay, or write it down. To convince or persuade the locals of Singapore. Okay, we already know that. Now comes the tricky part. I have given you 4 different messages. Let's read through all. Think about it. Which one is a valid message? Okay, number 1. Convince them that working with the Japanese was beneficial for them. Does the source show that the Japanese is beneficial, the rule is beneficial for them? If they're showing that everyone wants to come to them and the shops have good products compared to the British, of course their life is going to be better, right? Under the Japanese than the British, because they can buy so many goods and people want to buy all their goods. So, number 1 is a valid message. Okay, I'm also going to show you that there are other valid messages that is also accepted. Let's look at number 2. Japanese goods were better than British goods. Is that valid? Okay, think about it. Is that what you see? What you can tell from the source? Or is there a reason why the Japanese wanted to produce this poster and bring out the message to the audience? Okay, so number 2 is not the main message because you are just rephrasing your evidence. You are not inferring the main message. Okay? Of course, the Japanese goods is better than the British goods. I can see that in the source. But it is not the main message. Okay? Number 3. The Japanese was better than the British. That's what we wrote earlier, right? Okay, so this, like what we said earlier, correct already. Okay, because you can see that, everyone wants to go to the Japanese compared to the British. So they're trying to imply that I, as the Japanese, is better than the British. Okay? Last one, number 4. Convince the locals that they should rely on Britain. Okay? Think about it. Should they rely on Britain? Actually, they should not rely on Britain. They should not rely on Britain. What are you doing here? You look at the source above, right? Actually, over here, you're already seeing the words rely on Britain and you will lose your money. Remember? So, same as inference, are you supposed to just rephrase the evidence or list the evidence? No. So for this one, I will not accept as well. Why? Again, you are just lifting or rephrasing your evidence. Okay? So the only messages that are accepted is number 1, working. Okay, let me recap. Working with the Japanese was beneficial for them. That is the accepted one. And the next one is the Japanese was better than the British. Okay, the other two. Japanese goods was better than British goods. No. And they should rely on Britain. Also no. Why? Because it is lifted. Okay, and not the main message. Okay, then we go on to the evidence. The evidence shows a shop selling Japanese products, doing good business, and making good profits as there are a lot of customers while there's no one at the British shop. Correct? Yes. Okay, good. This means that the people will lead a better life if they cooperated with the Japanese. Also showing why the Japanese, their rule is beneficial for them. Right? So called rephrasing or linking back to the message. Okay? Thus, this source is published so that the locals of Singapore will support the Japanese. Okay? So that is your last part, which is the outcome. And altogether, if you get everything right, you will get this as an L3, 5. Okay? If you wish to, you can look at the descriptors here again. Look at your marks and see where do you fall under and why do you get that mark. If you are still not sure, you may ask us, take a picture, send to us, Miss Elsa or me, Miss Vanessa, and you can question us as well. Okay, and we will explain it to you. Okay, pause this video if you wish to take down the corrections for 1B. Okay, if not, we would go on to part C, 1C. If you wish to, in your own time, you may also take a break, pause the video, take a toilet break, come back and we'll continue. Okay, now I'm going to go on first. So part C is your C and C, correct? Now, the source is there. Okay, let us look at the question as well. Okay, first we always look at the provenance of the source. An account by a Chinese man who experienced the Japanese occupation, right? Source D, an Indian man's account of life during the Japanese occupation. Okay, so you can see that it's two different races, same time period, Japanese occupation. Okay, now look at source D. Sorry, not source D. Look at the question. Study sources C and D. They tell you already C and D. So when you write down your answers, make sure you write down C and D, not A and B. Okay? How different are these sources? And explain your answer. Okay? So, 6 marks in total. How different? Let's look at the question first. If they are asking you how, they are asking for extent. And if they are asking you for extent, what must you give? 2S, 2D, or 1S, 1D? Okay, I think some of you are still confused. But if I'm saying how different, I'm actually looking for this one, 1S, 1D. Okay, why? Because of the extent, right? How different as compared to how are these sources different? They are different in this way and that way. Then that is 2D. But if I'm saying how different are you from your sibling? I'm different in this way, but I'm also similar in another way. Okay, we'll come back to this type of questions more when we return to school. Okay, but just at the back of our head, remember, we are looking out for one similar and one difference. Some of you have given me 2 differences, but I can't award you the full marks even if it makes sense because you're not answering the question fully. Okay, now the main thing about compare and contrast questions, the main thing that we are looking out for is this idea of common criteria. Okay, on the side, the right hand side. So if you don't have a common criteria at all and you give me an I can infer, what do you think you are doing? You are answering it as a inference question and you are really not answering the question. Okay, so there must be a common criteria for you to get the higher marks. Okay, now let's look at the valid common criteria at the side. I give you 4 different choices. Okay, and I want you to think about it. Is there evidence to show that there's difference in the Japanese treatment of various races? Look at source C and source D. Yes, source C is talking about a Chinese and source D is talking about the Indian. Right, and it's 2 different races and the men. But did they talk about how the Chinese were treated versus how the Indians were treated? Okay, I'm going to show you this. So many of you pick this out as your evidence. Different in the Japanese treatment, a lot of you pick this out. When things went short, people turned to stealing. 4 people were caught stealing, their heads were chopped off. This scared people and stealing became unpopular. Anybody who was a threat was dealt with. Tales of torture. Did they talk about the treatment to this particular race, the Chinese? Okay, even though it's an account by a Chinese man, but did they say that the Chinese were targeted? If you think about it, no, it wasn't clear at all. And if you look at source D, this part, many of you highlighted. My family was staying opposite. One morning, some Chinese came to my house to hide. My mother gave her sari to a Chinese woman to disguise her as an Indian. She helped her apply charcoal. So a lot of you said that, oh, because the Indians helped the Chinese to hide, therefore the Japanese were nicer towards them. Is it clear? Actually, it is not clear. It is not enough evidence to prove that the Indians were treated in a better way. Okay, so the difference in the Japanese treatment of the various races, it is not a valid common criteria. Okay, listen carefully, because it wasn't specifically said in the sources that the Chinese were treated that way and the Indians were treated in the other way. Okay, or in a better way. If there's more evidence to prove that, definitely yes. And in the previous compare and contrast, we managed to see that very clearly. But in this one, it is not seen clearly. There are other differences and similarities. Okay? Second one, different in the ways Japanese controlled the people. Look at source C. How did they control the people? 5 seconds to think. What are the ways that they control people? Okay, if you look at source C, how did they control people? There's only 2 ways, right, that the Japanese can control, and we learned it in class. Fear, one way, and the other way is propaganda. Okay, So how did they control the people in source C first? If you look at it, where is the fear of propaganda? When 4 people were caught stealing, their heads were chopped off and displayed in public. These scared people, and stealing promptly became unpopular. Okay, or anybody who was seen as a threat was dealt with it in the same harsh way. Okay, so this one is on fear. What about source D? How did they control the people? 5 seconds to think. Okay, the Japanese wanted to remove and promote Japanese culture to influence the minds of the people. Students had to learn Japanese language in school. So, what did they do? This way is called propaganda. So, is number 2 a valid common criteria or not? Yes, because it is different in the ways that they control. Fear versus propaganda. Same or not? No. Okay, so they are different. So that's number 1 of the difference. Okay, number 3. Now let's look at similarities. Okay, the sources are similar in telling that the locals helped each other during Japanese rule. Did they both tell evidence of how the locals helped each other? Look at the sources again. I give you about 10 seconds. Pick out the evidence in your head, okay, or you can underline in your source. I will go through in 10 seconds. Okay, so how did the locals help? Let's look at source C. Once source C. Once the man who collects human waste in buckets accidentally spilled some feces at the guard post, people were asked who did it. I was one of those who refused to reveal the culprit. So they help them by not saying anything, right? Even though they know. Okay? Then what about source D? How did they help? This one is obvious because many of you picked this out. One morning, some Chinese came to the house to hide from the Japanese. The mother gave her a sari to disguise her as an Indian. Right? And even she helped her apply charcoal on her face and hide her hands. And her hands to hide her identity. Okay? So, number 3. Think about it. Is it a valid common criteria? You have evidence to prove, right, the similarity. So definitely, yes. Okay? Now, number 4. They were similar in how the Japanese treated the locals. Were they similar? Okay? Then let's look at source C. I think it's very obvious from source C, right? How did they treat the locals? They caused fear. They scared people, right? This part here. Okay, let me just identify for you in brackets. Okay, when 4 people were caught stealing, anybody who's seen or that was dealt with in a harsh way, right? In the second one, they had to face the direction. In this way, they gained obedience. The Japanese hated the Chinese the most. Okay. Did they say very clearly how they treated the locals? They didn't say how they were harshly treated, right? They just forced them to do certain things. Okay. So the idea of C is that they treated them with fear. They threatened them. But in source D, it is by force, okay, and obedience, right? This part. Okay, so is it actually similar? Fear and threat versus force towards the locals. Okay, I would say that it's still not very clear that many of you who identified some of the evidence and put this as how the Japanese treated the locals, it is not as clear yet. Okay, not enough evidence still to prove it. Okay, so this one, no as well. Okay, so if you think about it, which is the valid common criteria? Different in the ways the Japanese controlled the people, similar in telling that the locals helped each other during the Japanese rule. Okay, I want to draw out this other thing that some of you also did. Okay, for the helping part, number 3, some of you mentioned that the help, how the locals help, is actually different, because the first source C, they said that people help by not revealing the culprit and risking their lives, sacrificing, whereas the other one is just to hiding their identity. So number 3, if you say there is a difference, is also accepted. Okay, I will also accept it as long as your explanation is valid. Okay, but if you didn't explain properly and I still don't understand how it is a difference, I may not give it to you. Okay, so job well done for those who managed to do it. Okay, but let's look at the answers in full now. Okay, then you'll slowly understand. So firstly, the level of marks, number 1, L1, 1 mark. Not answering the question, no common criteria at all. How to give you any marks? Because there's no common criteria, the most important part of a comparison question. L1, 2 marks. Invalid common criteria. Valid matching of evidence but poor common criteria. So your evidence matches, but unfortunately common criteria doesn't match. You get an L1, 2. Okay, for I1 and I2 you may get an L2, 3. Okay, so it depends on how your common criteria is. Okay, now for L2, 3 marks, you have a valid common criteria but your evidence does not support. Okay, so you get a pass if you get a good common criteria basically. Okay, L3, 4 marks, valid common criteria and supporting evidence, you're getting there, right? L3, 5 marks, valid common criteria, supporting evidence and explanation. It means you have one paragraph that is solid, one difference or similarity that, wow, your common criteria, your evidence and explanations all on point. Okay, all on fleek, right? L4, 6 marks, means valid common criteria, supporting evidence, explanation, both paragraphs done, L4, 6 marks immediately. Okay, but it must be a similarity and a difference. Okay, here. Alright, now, if you don't understand still, never mind, I'm going to show you as an example. Source C and D are different in the Japanese treatment of the different races. What did we say about the common criteria just now? See, number 1, it is wrong, right? So the common criteria for this one is wrong because the sources doesn't show this. So immediately, number 1 now, it is an L1. Okay, I'll just write down first. Let's read on. Let's see if the evidence matches. The evidence states when 4 people are caught stealing, heads will be chopped off, etc. This means the Japanese treated the Chinese very badly. Okay, if I go on, however, source D states, one morning some Chinese came to my house to hide from the Japanese. The Chinese was disguised. This means that since Indians could help the Chinese by hiding them, the Japanese treated the Indians better. Okay, this one again, treated the Chinese very badly. Is it only the Chinese that were killed? Okay, so no, wrong already, this part, right? Anyone who was caught stealing was already displayed in public, their heads chopped off. My mother gave her sari to a Chinese woman to disguise her as the Indians. This means that since the Indians could help the Chinese by hiding them, the Japanese treated the Indians better. This part. Does it make sense? So if the Indian hides the Chinese, that means the Japanese treats them better. Okay, there's a missing link there, right? But many of you have written this down. That's why I chose this answer to show it. Okay, your explanation doesn't link to the evidence at all. So this part is also wrong. Right? So your evidence also cannot match. This is actually an L1. Two marks. Because at least you tried to get the common criteria, but it's invalid. Okay? Now, the next part. Okay? Source C and source D are different in terms of the methods that the Japanese use to control the people. Right? Just now we talked about this, correct? Common criteria. Immediately you get an L2. 3 marks, right? L2. Evidence. When 4 people are caught stealing, okay, they were treated in a harsh way. They used fear to get people to submit to the Japanese. However, source D states, the Japanese wanted to remove Western influence. Student has to learn Japanese in school. This means they use propaganda. So, does it answer the common criteria of methods to control the people? Definitely a yes. Okay, so for this one, you get an, even your explanation is good, evidence also there, like what we discussed before. This is an L3, 5 marks. Okay, not the total marks yet, right? Because the person hasn't given the similarity. Okay, now, similar. Source C and D are similar in saying that the locals assisted one another to avoid being persecuted, right? They help one another, correct? Yes. Common criteria there, L2. Evidence. Once the man who collects human waste accidentally spilled feces and they refused to reveal the culprit, that was your evidence, right? This means that there were people sacrificing their life for others not to be caught by the Japanese. Okay, that's your explanation. Similarly, the evidence from source D states, the Chinese came to the house and the Indian disguised the woman. This means that the locals were willing to help to prevent them from being ill-treated. Okay, so this definitely talks about how they assisted them. If you have both paragraphs from B and C, you immediately get an L4, 6 marks. Okay, so one more thing I want to highlight for compare and contrast questions is that these answers have clearly stated the framework or the structure. After they give the common criteria, they go to the evidence, right? Okay, common criteria I think we have already established. They immediately go to the evidence, you see? Evidence from C. And then they explain. Recap the structure, okay, in your head. Then this part. The missing, oh no, sorry, not the missing, the linking word. However, okay, to indicate the difference. Then they go back to this. Source D states, right? Whatever, this means that. After that. Okay? Now, let's look at the second one. The similarity paragraph as well. It is here, so clearly stated. This means that after the evidence. Okay? What is the linking word for similarity? Similarly. Okay? And then, again, what do? You give your evidence and then your explanation. Okay? So, this is for your comparison questions. Okay? You can pause the video here to take down the corrections for comparison, which is these 2 paragraphs. And for comparison, even though you have learned from Sec 1 already, there are still some people who are unaware of how to attempt these questions. At least if your structure is there, but your common criteria is wrong, we understand that you know how to attempt the questions. But if you are still answering as an inference style or another way in your own ways without the supporting evidence from both sources, without the explanation, then we know that you are still unclear of how to answer a comparison question. Okay, please go and recap from your skills package, and even this video you can recap again how to attempt the comparison question. Okay, now if you have any more questions regarding this checkpoint quiz, why you got certain levels, why you got certain marks, please refer your questions to either Miss Elsa or me, Miss Vanessa. You can take a picture of your work, email us, okay, and then we will reply you with the comments or further feedback if you need to. If not, after you've done your corrections on a piece of foolscap paper, okay, staple the corrections. Make sure that you get your parents' signature on this quiz. When we return, we will check for it, okay, and further clarify or go through certain questions that you're still unfamiliar with. Okay, and if you need more practices, please ask us when we return. But in the meantime, okay, continue all the skills that you have been doing, recap, but also continue the good habits that you have done. Okay, so if there's nothing else, I'm Miss Vanessa. Okay, thank you for listening. And please take a break before you start your next lesson. Okay, and have fun. Thank you.